Good evening, everyone. I'm Bob Giuliano, president of Gettysburg College, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this special Eisenhower Institute event. For those who may be new to the Eisenhower Institute, tonight's program reflects a core commitment of what we seek to do, helping to make sense of a society and a world that has become increasingly fractious and, at the same time, increasingly interconnected. We do this in many different ways, none more important than our effort to prepare Gettysburg College students for their responsibilities as global citizens and leaders. Through activities both in and out of the classroom, we provide our students with an integrated and consequential education, one that represents a call to action, one that encourages our students to lead lives of meaning and service. The Eisenhower Institute plays an integral role in this work, amplified by its dual locations in our historic town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, as well as in Washington, D.C., where the Institute has an office just a few blocks away from the White House. This combination of locations, each carrying significance for our country's past and future, provides unique opportunities for our students to engage with the issues of the day. It also helps us convene important conversations such as the one we will have tonight. I should note that these conversations have a special character, one grounded in the enduring legacy of President Eisenhower. The EI believes that it is essential to listen not just to those views that reinforce what we already believe, but also to hear perspectives that may differ from our own. This is part of the Institute's effort, done through a nonpartisan lens, to bring light and understanding to some of today's most pressing challenges. This isn't always easy, as you know, particularly in a time of hyperpartisanship. But that's why conversations like the one we're having tonight are so important. We must find a way to set aside, as Ike put it, the rolling loud drums and the shouting of empty slogans. That's what we intend to do tonight as we explore where we are as a nation, how we got to this point, and ultimately what we need to do to learn from this moment and to move forward together. We are so fortunate to have with us this evening two keen observers of the American political scene, both of whom will help us make sense of where we are as a country in light of the 2020 election and the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. I'm speaking, of course, about our distinguished guests, Charlie Cook and Stuart Rothenberg. Charlie is the editor and publisher of the independent, nonpartisan Cook Political Report, a newsletter he started in 1984. The Cook Political Report covers congressional, gubernatorial, presidential elections, and political trends. In 2010, Charlie was named as a co-recipient of the American Political Science Association's Carey McWilliams Award for major journalistic contributions to our understanding of politics. In 2013, he served as a resident fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Charlie writes a twice-weekly column for the National Journal, serves as a political analyst for NBC News, and was co-author of the 2020 edition of the Almanac of American Politics, which he will do again for the 2022 edition that will be published later this year. Welcome, Charlie. Stuart Rothenberg is the senior editor at Inside Elections with Nathan Gonzalez. Stuart served for over 2 decades as the editor and publisher of the Rothenberg Political Report, a nonpartisan political newsletter covering US House, Senate, and gubernatorial campaigns, as well as presidential politics. He was also a national columnist for Roll Call and for the Washington Post. In addition to having taught at Bucknell University and a Catholic university, Stuart has appeared on Meet the Press, This Week, Face the Nation, The News Hour, and many other television programs. His op-eds have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and other notable media outlets. Welcome, Stuart. Our moderator for tonight's discussion is Susan Eisenhower. Susan is the granddaughter of President Eisenhower and Chairman Emerita of our Eisenhower Institute. She is a consultant, author, and policy strategist with decades of work on national security issues. She also teaches our very own Gettysburg College students the skills of strategic leadership. Thank you for leading us in this important conversation, Susan. Now, before I turn this over to Susan, I'll say one last word. Today's program is but one of a series of conversations the college and the Eisenhower Institute will host over the coming weeks to help us make sense of this moment in time. For example, Gettysburg College has some of the nation's finest scholars on the Civil War era. we will soon announce a program to examine the two real parallels between the mid-1800s and today, as well as the lessons from the time of Lincoln that might be instructive today. We also anticipate additional programming focused on the United States' evolving role in the world. So please be on the lookout for information about future programming. With that, thank you again for joining us tonight, and I am pleased to leave you in the capable hands of my colleague and friend, Susan Eisenhower. Susan, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob, for those wonderful introductions. And it's really a tremendous pleasure to welcome Charlie Cook and Stu Rothenberg here at the Eisenhower Institute. Wow, I can't think of two more ideal people to discuss with us what is happening in this country. I think I can certainly speak for myself, but probably everybody else too, that the last year has been an extraordinary experience, one probably that won't be forgotten for a very, very long time indeed. And I was wondering if both of you could help us frame the time we're living in. How would you describe this moment in American history, and have we seen anything similar to this in the past?
Thanks, Susan, for having us on. It's an honor.
Go ahead, Charlie.
And it's appropriate that the Eisenhower Center sponsors something on at this time of hyper-partisanship, because we're at a time when, I mean, he used to refer to his philosophy as the middle way, and which was certainly as apt today of what we need to do as it was back then. So I think that we are as divided as we've been at any point since the Civil War Reconstruction. It's, you know, it's slightly different, but not that much. I think it's a deeply troubling time in American politics, and one that I don't know what the answer is, but I hope it comes soon.
Certainly, please.
Well, let me add, Susan. You know, I hope I'm not going to undermine my entire credibility here by this response, but I want to give you an honest response. So, you know, I went to college, I went to graduate school, got a PhD in political science, taught political science, then spent decades in Washington handicapping races with Charlie, and I felt like I understood the electorate. There were kind of rules of the road, you know. If you did this, you were disqualified from being in office. If you didn't do this, you couldn't get elected. If you did this, you had an event. And it just seems to me that over the past 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is, I just wonder whether everything I learned is ought to be thrown out. Now, Charlie will respond, and I'll give him a moment to gather his thoughts. He will respond, well, but when Donald Trump was not on the ballot in the 2018 midterm elections, the rules of the road held. Yeah, we got it right. We figured out. But I am just so concerned about the polarization, that anger, the distrust and undermining of crucial American institutions that protect our liberties, that I'm aghast. Charlie?
Yeah, Stu, to me, there's sort of, first of all, I think this has been building for about 35 years, but you're right, it's only gotten unrecognizable in the last 5 or 6. But, you know, to me, there are like 3 elements of this hyper-partisanship we have. I mean, there's a view in each party, one level, that the other party is just completely, their positions, their whole view of the world is ill-advised and illegitimate. The second is trust, that neither side believes, or a lot of people in each side, leaders, staff, you know, elected officials, don't believe that the other party is any longer capable of acting in good faith. Just a complete lack of trust that's there. And then the third is payback. It's retribution for transgressions that have happened over the last 20, 30 years. And that the scar tissue that builds up from battle after battle after battle is such that even with a president who I was hopeful would take a very bipartisan, more bipartisan view, and it's not too late, obviously, but I've been surprised that I would have thought that Joe Biden would have been more aggressively trying, at least initially, to go that bipartisan route. But I agree with Stu. It's a long time coming, but the last 5-6 years, it's just really accelerated.
Well, I must say that the thing that I have found absolutely shocking over this period of time is not only the attack on Congress that occurred, in other words, a refusal to agree with the validation of an election, but in doing so, it's really an attack on our judicial system as well, because the certification of the election went up through the courts. And so what we have today, this is obviously an expression that has entered the language again, that we have a big lie that is being promulgated. And I'm wondering how the two of you see that playing out. If this big lie continues, a sense of illegitimacy, am I right about this, might linger for the current president?
Stu, you go first.
You want me to start? I think there's no question, but that yes, it will continue because there are significant forces in the political arena that needed to continue, wanted to continue, believe it. I was just watching today on CNN about they had a crawl. You never know. Half the time I can't read the crawl, but this crawl said something like CNN report many Republican members of Congress believe the election was stolen. And of course they do, because they've been saying it for weeks and months, and they believe that because, as Charlie points out, they have no trust and confidence in the opposition. So I think it will continue. I think, I mean, this goes to that whole question of who or what is the Republican Party. And it ain't your grandfather's Republican Party, I know that. This is the Donald Trump Republican Party, and it's in his interest to talk about the election being stolen. And so we're going to hear more of this. So, I'm sure we'll hear it at CPAC and beyond as Republicans try to undermine Biden. Charlie may be right that Biden hasn't acknowledged his position. I mean, he's in a terrible position, 50-50 Senate with Joe Manchin as one of the 50 as a deciding vote. I mean, he's limited what he can do. But on the other hand, Biden is, you know, the liberal progressive grassroots want Joe Biden to be, I don't know, Franklin Roosevelt, and he's in an awkward position too. Charlie, what do you think?
Well, you know what I found so disconcerting watching the footage of the insurrection or the attack on the Capitol building and interviews with some of these people afterwards is that they saw themselves as patriots. They saw themselves as protecting the country in the same way as, you know, the Boston Tea Party or the people that stormed the beaches of Normandy under General Eisenhower. And you kind of wonder what got someone to the point where they thought they were protecting the country. And there was a survey a couple of years, 2019, by the Public Religion Research Institute, a think tank. And they did a survey and found that 80% of Democrats agreed with the statement that the Republican Party had been taken over by racists, and that 82% of Republicans believed the Democratic Party had been taken over by socialists. Now, how many of these people literally think that, I don't know, but to even go along halfway with statements like that, where these people are sincere, you know, you just have to wonder, how did they get to this place?
You know, I've been in my own head running a little theory that the financial collapse in 2008 might have really exacerbated these tendencies, because the crisis of 2008 was over pretty quickly for people in the Washington, D.C. area, but the effects of it were lingering. And then, as we all know, nobody, if perhaps except one or two people, went to jail as a result of the 2008 debacle. How much do you think that event more than a decade ago, actually created a baseline for what we're dealing with now.
Charlie?
I think it might well have contributed to it, and certainly there are people that sort of never economically recovered from that. But and I say this advisedly because I guess technically part of the media, as is Stu. But I think 40 or 50 years of institutions under attack, and sometimes they deserve to be under attack. Right. But when the best way for a journalist to win an award is to take somebody's head off. And if it's a government figure or a public institution of some kind, that's how you win a Pulitzer. That's how you, and again, right. Some of this is absolutely justified, but how long can institutions stay in this view is when they're under attack, right, left, at all points. And I find that, where people don't believe in anything, any institutions anymore, whether it's the church or anything else.
I'm struck by the fact that we did talk in 2012, 2008 about how groups were being kind of alienated from this society because of the economy, particularly non-college educated older white men, that they lost their jobs, they didn't have a place to go. What do you want them to do? Be an Uber driver? They were working in steel mines for steel companies or coal mines or whatever, or manufacturing plants. And they blamed the Democrats, but these were now Republican voters who blamed Republicans, Mitch McConnell, as much as anybody else. The establishment, the Republicans promised lower taxes, less regulation, balanced budgets, better jobs, and they just kind of exploded and ended up somehow taking over the Republican Party. But many of these were kind of union Democrats who lost their positions and were kind of radicalized. But here's the caveat. This is just a question for Susan. I'll throw it to Susan and Charlie. At least half of what makes Donald Trump and his appeal, in my view, cultural, not merely economic. It's us versus them. Those people, those folks who want to change our culture, our society.
Well, I will just say I completely agree with you, and the cultural piece of it has a lot to do with many factors. One of which is that we don't serve together in the military anymore, and so the elite, in effect, does not have skin in the game, as you might say. So that's one area of the dividing line right there. Charlie?
Well, I think Stu can guess where I'm going with this next. One of my two sons out of high school joined the Army and served in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne. And we live in the Bethesda Chevy Chase area, and someone asked my wife, well, couldn't you stop him? And she was like, first of all, A, you can't. B, I wouldn't. That some people need to serve in the military. They really do. And even from, upscale families to serve as enlisted people. And that, this is not just for the poor kids or the farm kids or something like that. And I agree with you, Susan, that I know the military doesn't necessarily want to draft because they don't want anybody that doesn't want to be there. But if we had some kind of national service where you had to do something, and whether it was military or work for the National Forest Service or whatever, but some kind of military service, and where, as you say, politicians, their kids are just as vulnerable to getting shipped over some places as anybody else's kids.
Right. Well, moving it back to the title of our talk today, sort of looking into the future, which is, of course, very hard to do. As we know, we've been in a very turbulent time and things keep coming out of left field. But I'm wondering how you see this sort of interesting thing emerge between Congress and the executive branch. With so many executive orders already from the Biden administration, part of me wonders sometime if we're sort of moving to a quasi-parliamentary system where whoever is elected president comes in and pushes a program without, going through, the hard work of, trying to talk people into it. Or is it too hard to talk members of Congress into the plans of a president and an opposing party? And what does that mean over the longer haul?
Charlie, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think it's I agree that it's terribly unfortunate that the sort of regular order is getting bypassed with real regularity. But the thing is, I think it's a byproduct of our legislative process becoming paralyzed. That if Congress doesn't act, there's a vacuum, and if Congress doesn't act, the president will enter that vacuum, or states will enter it, or that something's going to happen, and that Congress, that it used to be that halfway between Capitol Hill and the White House on 1600 Pennsylvania, halfway was about 8th Street. And you would find compromise somewhere roughly halfway in between. And somewhere along the way, in terms of partisanship, we went from compromise to just complete paralysis. And when that happened, presidents are going to fill that void. And we saw, we've seen 3 or 4 presidents in a row behave, very aggressively in terms of regulation. And this is both parties. This is not bashing either side.
Oh, exactly. Stu?
So I would say that we're already parliamentary system.
Yeah.
We have made the jump. There are, I believe the number, Charlie can correct me if I'm wrong, that there are 17 congressional districts in November voted for the presidential candidate of one party and the House candidate of a different party. In other words, there was straight ticket voting up and down the ballot. So you don't have the way, when I grew up, we had broad-based parties. Each party had a liberal and had liberals and conservatives in them. Together, they negotiated things. They built bridges. There were people in the middle. You don't have that now. You have the parties are ideological parties, and they're parliamentary to the extent that voters see them as either the liberals or conservatives. Now, I don't think we can do anything about this. I think this is a great tragedy. I thought broad-based parties brought us kind of the rationale to negotiate, had people in the middle, and you had the John Bros of the world or whoever. There were a lot, John Heinz's in the world who would negotiate. And we don't have them anymore, and I don't see us going there. So we're already there. I think, Susan, you raised an interesting question, or your point leads to another question, which I'll ask you and Charlie. We were told in graduate school that legislators are very jealous of their power. Members of Congress are very jealous. The House doesn't want to give power to the Senate. The House doesn't want to give power to the president. That's not the way I've seen the last few years here, where it appears that the president's party, members of the president's party controlling one of the institutions, are all but happy to follow him because they feel that he's so powerful, and if they take him on, they're at political risk. What happened there? Is it just Donald Trump, or have the institutions atrophied so much that people in the House and the Senate don't see themselves as needing to protect their own authority?
Well, Charlie, that's a question for you. I've got my own theories, but I'm very eager to hear what your thought is on that.
Well, and I think it's a product of something else, that a word that hasn't come up yet, is tribalism. It's our tribe versus the other tribe. And that, you don't criticize your tribe, you don't betray your tribe. And that with, as Stu said, so many people voting straight party tickets, and it's, 94% of all the members of the House of Representatives are in districts that their party carried in the presidential. And in the last election, 34 out of 35 Senate races were won by the same party that was carrying that state on the presidential. But that, if you think about straight party voting, though, someone who always votes a straight party, doesn't matter whether they're Republicans or Democrats, basically it's saying no matter how horrible my party's candidate is, and no matter how wonderful the other party, I'm going to stay with my party no matter what. And wow, I mean, people used to say, I vote the person, not the party. And I don't know, maybe somebody says that now, but there aren't many people that act on it.
Can I just add something that people may or may not know? It's, Susan, I'm sorry to jump in, because I mean, you're going to hear your thought, but right before I turned on my computer here to do this this event, Mitch McConnell was asked whether or not, if Donald Trump is the nominee of the party in 2024, will he support him? And he said, of course I'll support him. Well, I mean, I didn't think that was a surprise. I would have expected him to say that. He's a senior legislator in the party and he's not going to vote. But he did say some really nasty things about former President Trump recently that suggested that he didn't have a lot of confidence in his integrity and his leadership. But his immediate reaction is, of course, I'll support him. That does go to Charlie's point, I think.
Yeah, it sure does. I may get into some trouble by saying this, but I think sheer intimidation is also playing a very big role. And actually even the intimidation of that comes with violence. I mean, I thought it was so interesting, didn't both of you, that Liz Cheney got tremendous support the minute there was a secret ballot involved. That the minute anything becomes, traceable to the voter up there on Capitol Hill, then things change. I must say that we're being overwhelmed with questions here. So we've obviously gotten off to a provocative start. So the first question for both of you, and Charlie, why don't I ask you to start out here? The question is, do you think that the apparent absence of a common enemy like communism or Nazi Germany that Americans used to feel united against is a factor in this polarization?
It's something that we feel nostalgic towards the Cold War era, but at least the war, I'm teasing, but the thing is, there was a clarity there that there was an order to the world then that we don't have now. And you're right, it did unify the country, a common adversary, and I guess it was sort of tribalism, but we were all in the American tribe, and we don't feel that way anymore. And so I think there's something to that. I think there are a lot of elements, but I think that's a very legitimate point.
Yeah, it's a legitimate point. Stu, did you?
Yeah, a few things. One, we used to say that politics ends at the water's edge. And then Vietnam happened, and suddenly everything changed and became, again, a partisan issue, an ideological issue, a cultural issue, the war. And so I think that changed things. In addition, I mean, we still have adversaries. China and Russia are obvious ones. I mean, the Russians are doing a lot of really bad stuff. And you would think there'd be a unified opposition to it. But the difference is that Putin is an authoritarian autocrat. Communism was all about was anti-religious. And it seems to me that the Republicans have now, they could get all upset about communism, but an authoritarian, we got authoritarians everywhere. Marcos here and Castro there and whatever. So I think that's a little different, the kind of the nature of the Russian threat or the Chinese threat. I guess I'll stop there. But it's true. We used to be unified around foreign policy issues. Charlie is exactly right. Not an America first way, but an America leading the way against the bad guys. Now we can argue who the bad guys are, and maybe we helped some bad guys along the way. I dare not veer into that discussion of Mosa or whatever, but at least there was kind of a sense on the two sides, and we don't have that quite now.
Well, I'm afraid we're not. I'm sorry. Please, Charlie. No.
Go ahead.
No.
Well, I would have thought that we had been the leaders of the free world for 3/4 of a century, and that whoever was president of the United States was de facto the head of the free world. And we sort of advocated that place. And, I thought something interesting in the last few weeks before the election is that why didn't Biden go to South Florida, to Miami, and to give a speech attacking President Trump because of his support or friendliness with Putin? And the thing is, in South Florida, where there's so many rabid anti-communists, first of all, from Biden's standpoint, A, it might be helpful. B, it'd have been a heck of a lot of fun. Why didn't they do that? But instead, the whole spectrum of democratic socialism was hurting Democrats down there, but they didn't do what would seem to me to be a very logical, and as I said, fun thing to do. Anytime a Democrat can stick it to a Republican for being cozy with the communists, gosh, how much fun would that be?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's a really interesting point. Maybe we'll have time to talk about all the things that should have been done during the election but weren't. I'm afraid I can't let the two of you off the hook on this. We have a viewer here this evening that wants to know, to what extent do you believe that the news media's ever increasing bias plays a role in the country's growing polarization? So,
can I answer with one word or two words? Of course, yes.
Of course.
I mean, of course it is. Whether you like the folks at Fox or you like the folks at CNN or MSNBC, I mean, we don't have news programs very much anymore. We have talk radio on television, and to me, that's a great sadness. You can still find news places. Go to BBC. Mm-hmm. Go to the NewsHour. But you turn on the primetime network, the three big cable news network, you don't get news. You get lectured at by hosts who are sure they're right and everybody else is wrong. I think it's terrible. And now, having said that, and I'll stop here because Charlie probably has a whole load to say on this. When the president lies about most things, when a president lies about most things, you got to call it out. I mean, you can't just let it flow out there into the environment. So I think the media is in an awfully difficult position. We've never had to deal with someone who wanted to so manipulate the media and mobilize public opinion against the media. But I think the media has made it easier for him to do that. And yes, it's terrible. Go ahead, Charlie.
When the three of us were growing up, what did the word media mean? It was, ABC, CBS, NBC, and their local affiliates, the Associated Press, the U.S. News, and UPI, three news magazines, Time, Newsweek, U.S. News, and Paul Harvey. Okay, that was media, and everybody got their news from the same place. And some people became Republicans and conservatives, some became Democrats and liberals, and some stayed in the middle. But everybody, and the old thing about everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but their own set of facts. But we more or less had a shared set of facts that more or less everybody agreed to. But now media has gone off, as Stu said, into cable television news and very ideological, whether it's cable, whether it's talk radio, whether it's websites, whether it's through social media. And all this now is in the rubric of media. And so, I mean, in a perfect world, every American adult would read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. They would watch the news hour every night. And on Saturdays, they would read The Economist. And now, sadly, that's not the world we live in. Heck, I would just settle for them just watching 30 minutes of rotate between ABC, CBS, and NBC, where at least it's not, it's not intended to be ideological. But one other thing though is, for a lot of people, bias is anything that I don't agree with. That if anybody says I don't agree with, well, obviously they're biased. Well, maybe not. I think a lot of people wouldn't know bias if they saw it, or they do see it. They don't necessarily know it. But
we've gotten that from calling racist, Charlie. We've gotten that from calling races. You say, oh, this guy's going to win. This guy's a better chance to win. Oh, you're biased. You're what? I'm just making an analytical judgment based on the data. But one other thing. What makes this worse is that now we've gone from Fox to Newsmax and One America News. Have you watched them? Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, as we stand and look at really an extraordinary period that's just passed, and really beginning to absorb the great insights you bring to the causes of where we are today. President Biden started out by calling for unity when he was elected president. So we have one question here about, is President Biden's call for unity similar? How does it relate to President Eisenhower's middle way? And then I would add to that question, what are Biden's chances of being successful here with an economy that's still sputtering along and slow rollout on the vaccine, as we have more and more people in this country who are hurting or can't get beyond where they were at the worst of the pandemic. So let me throw, Stu, would you like to start, or Charlie?
Charlie?
First of all, I don't want to sound like I'm, whatever President Biden is going to do is a done deal, because, heck, we're just barely a month in. But I was extremely hopeful, or have been extremely hopeful, that we would see a different direction for three reasons. Number one, temperament. Some elected officials, they just want to fight. That's all they want to do. And Joe Biden is a very gregarious guy who, I think he likes dealing with people. So I thought temperament-wise, and he's not aloof or distant or anything like that. Secondly, because Biden was in the Senate starting 1972 and back at a time when government more or less worked, that he had seen it when it actually functioned well, and that, my thinking was he would want, his natural inclination would be to try to take things back to that point where there were relationships and people dealt with each other in a fairly straight up way. And third, just circumstances. It's kind of hard to overreach, as Stu said a little while ago, when the Senate's 50-50 and the House is darn near 50-50, that overreach is kind of hard. So that I would have thought just necessity would have pushed. And I do believe that is President Biden's inclination. I really believe that. But there's so much scar tissue there. And there's a lot of folks that are in the White House around Biden. And of course, Biden was President Obama's vice president. But I think a lot of these people, they were there in the Obama White House, and they have this view that if President Obama couldn't get Republicans to the negotiating table, then no Democratic president can. And, you know, I don't know that that's necessarily true. And maybe Republicans wouldn't have negotiated in good faith. Maybe they wouldn't have. But I would have given it a little bit more of a chance. I wouldn't be going, reconciliation would be the last way to get something through. It would not be the way you're sort of inclined to do from the very beginning. And so I'm, you know, we've got a long way to go, but I'm disappointed that we seem to be headed down the reconciliation road, which basically means, you know, we're going to do this by a party line basis, which I think is a very risky way, and it's not good for the country. And that we needed someone to break out of this vicious cycle of partisanship, and somebody had to do it. And I was hopeful that this would be the time we could do it, but maybe not.
And instead, we're confirming Supreme Court justices on majority votes. Increasingly, the 51, it's a parliamentary system again. You got 51 votes. You can do what you want. In the old days, you had to compromise. I think Biden has been very sincere in his desire to reach out. Gosh, this is probably something I shouldn't say. He sounds a bit. I can't even say this. I'm going to tell you what I was going to say, and then I'm going to back off it. He almost sounds naive about thinking that he can get it done. That he is such a, you know, he knows the institution of the Senate. He knows the process. He is a person of goodwill. It's got to fall in place. For me, as a handicapper, I'm more concerned with the outcome rather than the process. Charlie is talking about the process, and at the end, if he goes, if assuming we have 1.9 trillion through reconciliation, it'll all be about Joe Biden using reconciliation and 1.9 trillion. For me, as a handicapper, I look in the future. What does it mean for the country? Does it mean that the country is going to be better off economically in 2022 and then in 2024 because of what he did? If so, that will help him politically. But in the short term, he's going to take a lot of criticism. You know, he's taking it now for the OMB director, the appointment. And it's the nature of the game when you're the president of the United States. You're going to get second guessed and third guessed by everybody, including those people who have no idea what you're doing.
Well, I think also it's not surprising that skating isn't going to be smooth after what we've just been through. I mean, you know, there is a lot to come to terms with, which sort of brings me to the next question. We have a listener who is really reflecting a lot of the worries that many people have, that America is not seen as the way it was to the rest of the world. So the question is, would you still consider America the leading country of the world today?
Well, I guess I would ask the question, if we aren't, who is? And I don't think we are the way we used to be. Not that, you know, but at the same time, nobody has, you know, nobody's taken that position. We've sort of given part of it up. But I think that while President Biden is someone who is deeply committed to rebuilding our relationships around the world and our friendships with our traditional allies, and absolutely, I believe. But the thing is, I think it's going to be a long time before we could earn back the trust that had been accumulated over that 3/4 of a century, that for someone in, you know, let's say Europe or wherever, they may think, you know what, well, Americans may have elected someone now who believes in the world order and everything, but the thing is, but there always might be one election away from going back to where they were. So can we trust them? And that's I think it's going to take a long time if we ever can get quite back to where we were, say 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago.
Agree completely. I have nothing to add. Exactly right. Yeah, it's undermined our reputation and legitimacy and confidence, and it's not going to be easy. Right. Donald Trump appears to be running for president in 2024. At the moment, he says he is.
Well, it's
so that would just be very upsetting to our allies who feel as though they've just taken a deep breath, that we've survived a difficult 4 years of America first. So yeah, I think Charles is exactly right.
Well, there's there are a couple of questions. Maybe I'll put them together so that each of you can take a moment really to give your own view of what we might expect going forward. Again, the title of our talk here. Apparently among the questions, and we've had an absolute truckload of them, trust me on this, there is apparently a common theme that around a question related to the right-wing media and their repeated assertions that their voices have been silenced or censored. This whole business of violating American norms, both sides claim that they are not getting a fair shake in the media. And again, how detrimental is that? And then after this question, I think it'd be a great time to start doing a little forecasting. Charlie, do you have some thoughts on this First Amendment? Did the President of the United States have a First Amendment right, for instance, to encourage people to take matters into their hands on January 6th? And are they now currently being silenced? Or how do you view all of these interlocking issues?
I think asking anyone who, in my case, is 67 years old, to comment on, the digital world and the digital democracy and all that is probably an exercise in futility. I mean, in my view, these platforms, they are corporate entities, and I don't know that the government should be telling a company what they have to do and what they should have and have to and can't carry, or what they shouldn't carry, or what they should carry. I don't know. I mean, to me, that's what the market's supposed to do. If the public sees a entity, like whether it's a social media company or whatever, as not playing square, then they'll watch or use something else. So I'd say let the market do it, but I don't think that, I'm not sure forcing, and whether it's a social media company or a television network, forcing them to carry something that they think is dangerous or wrong, that doesn't strike me as terribly democratic either.
Well, just to follow up on this, Charlie, I'd like your view on this, but I've had somebody I know taken down from Facebook and is absolutely roaring about it. And I made the same point you did. Why haven't the Democrats made this a very strong message to outline the difference between the government's assurances to the public about First Amendment rights versus a company's right to offer service to whoever they want to offer service to?
I don't know that you're going to see, and I'm not, I don't want to sound like I'm knocking any party, but I don't think you're going to see Democrats rushing to defend any really large company and really successful. I mean, now, my own view is, you know what, if you have a product, if you thought of something and you developed something and you did it better than anybody else, then I say more power to you. I mean, I'm not going to take them down just because they've been successful and did something better than anybody else did. But then again, I'm not, so I'm probably not the right person to ask on this.
Is Stu the right person to ask? Stu, what do you think about this?
Probably not, but I'll come from a very different point of view. I think what has happened in the media is one of the most important things that's happened in undermining our stability as a country and radicalizing portions of the population. And I don't say this lightly. We used to have, we didn't like them, but we used to have political bosses. Remember we had political bosses, the dailies, or there was some guy in Nassau County, New York, who decided who was going to have the trash contract, or we had political bosses all over the country, Republican and Democrat. It wasn't just Democrats. And they ran organizations and large institutions that provided jobs for people and told people how to vote and things like that. And some of it was good and some of it was terrible. Now we have most of our institutions have been undermined. Political parties have some power. Certainly, I'm not saying they don't have any power. There's strong identification, polarization, and partisanship. But you talk to somebody who wants to run for office, they probably they'd prefer to be on Sean Hannity, raising money off Sean Hannity and getting Sean Hannity's endorsement than their local political leader. And then you look at all the kind of the broad array of media outlets that just don't show a lot of responsibility. Again, across the political spectrum.
Right.
And I don't see Chris Cuomo talking about Andrew Cuomo's problems a lot. I have stopped watching Chris Cuomo very much. But so anyway, I think this is a huge problem, and I think it's going to exist. And I think it's one of the things we have to deal with, and one of the reasons why I'm worried about 2022, 2023, 2024.
Well, that's a great segue to our last. Oh, I'm sorry, Charlie. Do you want to add something to that?
No, go.
No, I was going to say this is a great segue to our last question, which is we have a lot of people asking what your predictions are for 2022, 2024, depending on how far out you want to go, and how can we restore the legitimacy of not only the process, but even in the polling process. That's one of the questions. And I think this will be the one we wrap up with. So if you would like to add anything else in this, please do.
Go ahead, Charles.
I was going to say, I'll take the easy part. In terms of 2022, who the heck knows? I mean, the thing is that the forces where you've got redistricting, and the states aren't even going to get the numbers from the Census Bureau to be able to start drawing lines until September at the earliest. So there's redistricting. There are retirements, and these are not disassociated because, sometimes, a lot of times a member, if they think they're going to get a bad district, or if they think, they retire. Well, which side has more retirements than the other? Because it's usually harder to hold on to an open seat than where an incumbent is running for re-election. It's retirement. Is that a party that thinks that they're going to have the wind at their backs? They generally have a better time, more success recruiting than a party that senses that they've got the wind in their faces. I mean, it's just sort of all these, and then will the divisions in the parties that the division between the pro-Trump and the non-Trump side within the Republican Party and that civil war there, and then in the Democratic side between sort of their joint opposition to President Trump was the one thing that helped the Democratic Party together and from going off into the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren direction or into the more traditional. So there are just so many different elements that we have and how's President Biden going to do? So all of these things are going to dictate what 2022 looks like. So I just don't think we can, it's just a work in progress, and it's going to be a long time before we'll be able to say, I think, with any legitimacy of what we think may happen in 2022.
I think all we can say is, Susan, is both the Senate and the House are in play. The House, the Democrats have a 5-seat advantage. History would suggest the Republicans are poised to have gained, just because it's a midterm election, poised to have larger gains. The kicker, of course, is Donald Trump. Charlie's already talked about redistricting and reapportionment and retirements, but the kicker is Donald Trump. I mean, the Democrats still do best running against Donald Trump, and if he is handpicking candidates and is in the news every day as the leader of the party, that's good news. That gives the Democrats an angle, a message that they can use. Although I think the Republicans should have the advantage, they only need to gain 5 seats in the House. I would just, for now, too close to call. It's the House is in play, but it's not. It's hard to know where. The Senate, there are 20 Republican seats up. I believe 14. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to say something, Charlie? There are 20 Republican seats up, 14 Democratic seats up, I believe. The key is I'd watch Georgia, where Warnock has to run for a full term. He just got part of a term. It's, it was a very close race. Georgia was a unusual situation. And on the other side, I would look at Pat Toomey, particularly in Pennsylvania, maybe Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. If something happens with Rob Port, if the Republicans nominate a crazy person, Ohio could be worth looking at, and North Carolina. But again, the Senate is in play. So what can people do? Get out and vote. Vote in local elections. Local elections matter. Who knew? Be active in the party, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Be active. So I think that is my message is the country's evenly divided. Expect this to occur, to stay this way for a while until we work our way through this. Either there are going to be demographic changes as the country changes, or because one party kind of abuses its power. Some people might say, "You mean that hasn't happened yet?" So you have to assume everything's going to be tight, everything's going to be competitive. Charlie, I'm sorry, you had something to say.
I was just going to say, to me, the Republican Party is a party that once was a great party, and it will again be a great party, but they've got some massive challenges. It's a party that's dependent way too much on white voters in a country that's getting more diverse, too much on small town rural in a country that's getting more urban and suburban. I mean, they keep sort of doubling down on shrinking shares of the population. And at some point, they're in an unsustainable place, and they've got to change. And the question is, how soon will the Republican Party fix their problems, or do they just have to wait till Democrats go too far and self-destruct? I mean, one or the other. But it's I do think the good news, we need to leave on a happy note, is in 2014, we had the lowest midterm election turnout since 1942. 1942. 2016 presidential turnout was average, right in line with the 3 previous. But 2018, we had the highest midterm election turnout since 1914. And then last year, the highest in 120 years since 1900. Now, some people turned out because they loved President Trump, and other people turned out because they loathed President Trump. But people thought in the last 2 elections, people believe it matters who won. And so that's a good thing, even though we've been talking for the last hour about a lot of things that are fairly depressing, but there are some good things out there that people are engaging. And I'm very hopeful, and I'm glad Stu mentioned that a second ago.
Well, I'm delighted that we ended on a happy note, because we're trying to mobilize all of our students to become agents of change and to commit themselves to this field. And I think that there's more civic interest than ever in the way our elections are voted on and resolved. So let me thank both of you, Charlie and Stu. Thank you so much from everybody at the Eisenhower Institute and Gettysburg College for a great conversation. We look forward to staying in touch with you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.